Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Akash Pandita, working as an assistant professor in Department of Neonatology, Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate Institute of Medical Sciences. Today, I will be talking about neonatal seizures. I will be taking your questions at the end of the session, and I will cover my presentation in the following headings. I will be telling you about the definition, etiology, what is the pathogenesis, how differently neonatal seizures are from the adult seizures, what should be the approach to investigate, how to manage these seizures, and how to prognosticate, because that is the most common question which the resident will ask you in neonatology. Coming to the definition, as we all know, neonatal seizures, they are basically paroxysmal alteration of neurological function, and it can involve either behavioral change or a motor manifestation, or it can manifest as an anatomical changes. Autonomic changes in the form of heart rate, alterations in blood pressure. So that's how we define neonatal seizure. As far as epilepsy is considered, it is defined as two seizures which are at least 24 hours apart. That is the epidemiological definition of an epilepsy. We all know that neonatal seizures is one of the most common emergency which we see in our neonatal ICUs. It is in red alert. The neonatal seizure itself can be because of some severe derangement in any of the system of the body, or seizure can itself cause impaired neurological development. It can cause even death in neonates and has long-term implications also. Seizures are usually focal. They are not typically tonic-clonic as we see in adults. That is because of the immature myelination, and they are restricted usually to single hemisphere. The other peculiarity of neonatal seizures is that the majority are subclinical. They are also called as subtle seizures, which is the most common type of neonatal seizures which we see in our neonatal population. Although our neonates, they have less threshold for seizure activity, but the prognosis is good when we compare it to the children or adults. As far as the incidence is considered, the total neonatal seizures, it is said according to the National Neonatal Perinatal Database, the incidence is around 10 per 1000 live births, and we know it is more common in preterms, almost twice as common in term babies. There are various etiology to neonatal seizures, but the predominant causes, that is majority of the neonatal seizures, 75% are because of the asphyxia, which constitutes 50% of the total neonatal seizures, followed by intracranial hemorrhage, that is around 10 to 15%, and another 10% is because of the arterial strokes, that is perinatal strokes. So 75% of the neonatal seizures are because of these three common conditions. The other less common but important conditions include metabolic derangements like hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, hyponatremia, hypomagnesemia, and other rare causes include inborn errors of metabolism, cerebral dysgenesis, and cerebral malformations. Majority of the neonatal seizures, they are acute symptomatic seizures, that is, they are because of the acute insult. So as we have already discussed, HIE, that is the seizures because of the asphyxia or perinatal asphyxia, they are usually seen within the first 12 to 24 hours of life, and they, along with the intracranial hemorrhage and intracranial infections, are the most common causes of neonatal seizures. Whenever we are treating any seizures, we first should try to identify the treatable causes, which are very easy to detect and very easy to treat. For example, whenever there is neonatal seizure, we should do a glucose test with the help of a glucose dipstick, which is almost available in each and any ICU. Rule out hypoglycemia. If it is there, treat for hypoglycemia, followed by hypocalcemia, which if you are not sure or if you are not able to detect hypocalcemia, you should at least give 2 ml per kg of 10% calcium gluconate. Then you should move on to anticonvulsants. Infections are one of the most important causes of neonatal seizures, especially in our setup in developing countries, because sepsis is the most common cause of the neonatal mortality, which is around 35%, and meningitis is a dreaded complication of any neonatal sepsis. And this sepsis can be because of the bacteria, because of the virus, because of the fungus, and congenital intrauterine infections. In congenital intrauterine infections, Toxoplasma and Cytoplasma virus, they usually cause seizures in the first 3 days of life. whereas herpes simplex virus usually occurs after first 7 days of life. There will be other features of inborn intrauterine infections like microcephaly, jaundice, hepatosplenomegaly, cataract. So you should always do a thorough head-to-toe examination to find out the cause. So whenever you are thinking that the baby has come with seizures and he has other signs of sepsis like lethargy, poor feeding, abdominal distension, should always treat it as meningitis. Even if you are not able to do CSF because of the critical illness of the baby, you should always start antibiotics in the anti-meningitic dose and treat it as meningitis unless proven otherwise. The other common metabolic derangements which are the cause of neonatal seizures and are very easy to treat and have good prognosis includes hypoglycemia, which is seen around in 3% of the patients, hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia, hypo and hypernatremia, especially during treatment because of the cerebral edema. Other less common causes include pyridoxine deficiency or whenever there is a local anesthetic intoxication. In local anesthetic intoxication, the most common signs which can help you to lead this diagnosis is in a baby who has had a local anesthetic injection, his pupils will be fixed and dilated. So always remember to examine pupils if you have ruled out other causes and these seizures are refractory to the treatment and the seizures usually occur in the first 12 hours of life. Always look at the pupils. They will be fixed and dilated if it is because of the local anesthetic intoxication. Second important sign is look at the scalp. Examine the scalp carefully. Majority of the times you will see a needle injury on the scalp. That will also help in establishment of the diagnosis. These seizures usually respond well and over the time over 12 to 24 hours as this anesthesia is excreted with the help of urine, these babies recover. Sometimes they may require respiratory support in the form of ventilation, but usually anticonvulsant is not needed for such cases. Coming to the pathophysiology, the neonatal seizures is because of the imbalance between the excitatory and the inhibitory pathways in the brain activity of a neonate. So the excitatory neurotransmitters are in quantity and quality both. They are more as compared to the inhibitory neurotransmitters. That is why neonates have low seizure threshold and they have neonatal seizures have frequency which is almost 3 to 4 times than seen in the pediatric and adult population. Coming to our basic knowledge of physiology, there is always a resting membrane potential which is around -60 to -70. And whenever there is a positive charge which goes inside the cell depolarizes and electric activity starts. Normally what happens in neural brain, there are two ionic transporters. One is called as NKCC1 and other is KCC2. The NKCC1, which is a chloride importer, that is, it helps the chloride to move inside the cell. It is predominantly present in the neonatal brain, whereas the KCC2, which causes chloride to move out of the cell, it is developed later in the life. So when a neonate is born, it has NKCC1, which causes chloride to move inside the neuronal cell, whereas the KCC2, which is chloride efflux, which causes chloride efflux, that is, causes chloride to move from the neuron to the extracellular space, is not developed at the birth. It takes some time, usually 2 to 3 months. So as a result of this predominant of this chloride importer, the neurons of the neonates, they have high quantities of chloride channel. So whenever any neurotransmitter acts, it acts on the GABA channel. So what happens whenever this channel opens out, the chloride which is present in the higher quantity within the cell, it moves out and it calls. So the negative potential will become less. From -70 it becomes -50 and this causes the cell to fire. Whereas in the adult brain, both are equally developed. In fact, KCC2, which causes chloride to move out of the cell, is more developed as compared to NKCC1. So in adult brain or pediatric brain, the KCC2 is predominant, so the chloride is more present outside the cell. So whenever the GABA acts, it causes chloride to move inside the cell, leading to hyperpolarization. So this is the main difference. GABA is excitatory in neonatal brain, whereas it is inhibitory in pediatric and adult population. That is the main difference of high incidence of neonatal seizures. So as we have already discussed, there is preponderance of NKCC1 channels, which leads to excessive neurotransmitters. In fact, GABA, which is inhibitory, is excitatory in neonatal brain. And there is increased permeability to sodium and other ions. And there is the inhibitory neurotransmitter as well as the pathways. They are not well developed in neonatal brain. So this leads to predominantly excitatory pathway and high quantity of excitatory neurotransmitters inside the neonatal brain. And this causes more frequency of neonatal seizures. So when we see at the mechanism, how does a neonatal seizure cause threat to a neonatal life, or how does it affect the long-term outcome of a neonate? First of all, whenever there is repeated seizures, it causes hypoventilation. As a result of hypoventilation, the oxygen content in the blood will decrease. That is, it will cause hypoxemia. Whenever there is hypoxemia, the blood flow to the brain will decrease, so it will cause an ischemic insult to the brain. Second thing is, whenever there is decreased ventilation, the CO2 will rise. We all know hypercapnia leads to increased cerebral blood flow. As a result of increased cerebral blood flow, there can be IVH, there can be brain hemorrhage, which again will lead to impaired neurodevelopment outcome. As we all know that seizures are associated with autonomic features like hypertension, tachycardia. So whenever there is hypertension, it will also lead to increased cerebral blood flow. Again, there is a risk of intracranial hemorrhage, IVH, in these babies. On the other hand, whenever there is seizures, it causes a toll on the activity and on the ATP of the cell. So more and more ATP is utilized as cells are continuously firing. As a result, the aerobic metabolism shifts to anaerobic metabolism. And we know whenever there is anaerobic metabolism, there will be accumulation of lactate. This lactate again causes vasodilatation and leads to increased blood flow and brain injury. Neonatal seizures also leads to increased release of excitatory neurotransmitters like glutamate. So there is excitotoxic injury to the neurons. So these are the four basic mechanisms by which seizures, they cause injury to the neonatal brain. Neonatals, remember that neonatal seizures can be because of an insult which has already occurred, or they itself can cause insult to the brain. That is why we treat seizures, to prevent any mortality as well as morbidity and try to improve the long-term outcome. Second thing is types of seizures. The neonatal seizures are slightly different from the seizures which we see in pediatric and adult population, and broadly they are divided into four categories. The most common being clinical seizures. That is, clinical seizures are where we can see the manifestation clinically. It can be tonic, clonic, subtle seizures. The other indication is subclinical. That is, you are not able to see. It is only when you do an EEG you are able to record that yes, there is a seizure activity, but there is no clinical manifestation. The third is the electroclinical seizures, where there is an EEG which shows seizure, and clinically also you can see either tonic posturing or tonic-clonic movements or myoclonic jerks. Remember, in neonates, the most common type of seizures is electric only. That is, if you do not do an EEG, you are not able to see 50% of the neonatal seizures. Clinical seizures are less common as compared to only EEG only seizures. So, ideally, every unit which is caring for the newborn should have an EEG in place. Without EEG, you will miss 50% of the neonatal seizures. Further, when we see clinically seizures, they are broadly divided into four types. Most common being the subtle feature. Subtle, it is called subtle because of the subtle features which we see, that is, there will be gaze fixation, lip smacking, boxing, paddling movements, gaze fixation. Other common type of seizures include clonic, tonic and myoclonic. We will discuss one by one all these type of seizures. The most common is the subtle type, as already discussed, and it is most commonly seen in preterm compared to term babies. They are visible clinically in the form of, as already discussed, gaze fixation, lip smacking, chewing movements, paddling, boxing, and usually EEG will be normal in these babies. Sometimes they can present as apnea, but to distinguish an apnea because of the seizure and because of the apnea prematurity, remember, whenever there is apnea because of the seizure, it will be associated with tachycardia, not bradycardia. Only later when the seizure is persisting, that is, the baby is in epilepticus, it will have bradycardia. Otherwise, whenever there is apnea because of the seizure, it will always be associated with tachycardia. And apnea because of seizure is more common in term babies compared to preterm babies, whereas apnea of prematurity is predominantly seen in preterm babies. So these are the common differentiating features. Other features which can be seen are the autonomic features, which I already discussed: tachycardia, hypertension, mottling. These can be the other changes which can be seen as a manifestation of seizure. Coming to the clonic seizures. These are the repetitive biphasic movements in which we have a fast component and a slow component. They can involve almost any component of the body, for example, face, limbs, diaphragm, or even pharyngeal muscles. They can be either focal or they can be multifocal clonic seizures. Multifocal clonic seizures are usually, they don't follow Jacksonian march and they are migratory. That is, you can see seizure first in the right upper limb followed by left lower limb. So there is not a fixed pattern. And usually multifocal clonic is associated with abnormal EEG, whereas focal clonic is associated with normal EEG. The common causes of focal clonic seizures includes hypocalcemia. Whenever you see a focal clonic seizures, always think of two conditions. One is hypocalcemia, which has got a very good prognosis, and other thing is subarachnoid hemorrhage. These are the two common conditions which cause focal clonic seizures, and they have the best prognosis among neonatal seizures. So always think, whenever you are seeing focal clonic, always rule out hypocalcemia and SCH. Both have very good prognosis. Multifocal clonic seizures, where you can see the fast component and the slow component. So coming to the tonic seizures, they can again be focal tonic or generalized tonic seizures. They can be either in the form of sustained flexion or extension of a limb or appendicular. Usually the focal tonic, they are always associated with abnormal EEG, and they are the most common type of tonic seizures which we see. The generalized seizures, that is the generalized tonic which resembles decorticate or decerebrate posturing, is because of IVH. So whenever there is generalized tonic seizures, always palpate the fontanella and see whether the fontanelle is bulging or not. And usually generalized tonic seizures, they respond poorly to anticonvulsants, and sometimes they are even not considered, according to the latest classification, they are even not considered as seizures. They are considered as just as abnormal postures, and usually they are associated with poor prognosis. So the most common cause of generalized tonic seizures, especially in preterm, is IVH. So always palpate a fontanella, and usually they do not respond well to anti-seizure medications, and they have got very bad prognosis. Only focal tonic will be associated with abnormal EEG. Generalized tonic seizures, which are considered as a part of abnormal posture and sometimes are not considered as actual seizures, they will be associated with normal EEG and they will respond poorly. This is an baby having myoclonic seizures. So the basic difference between a myoclonic seizure and a tonic-clonic seizure is that myoclonic is a sudden jerk. It usually involves a single group or multiple group of muscles, and the important thing is it needs to be differentiated from sleep myoclonus. Sleep myoclonus is a normal thing, it is a physiological thing, and it does not need any anti-seizure medications. Usually the sleep myoclonus will occur only during sleep, that is during NREM sleep, and usually whenever you awake the baby, the seizures will abort. Second thing is, the sleep myoclonus never involves face. So these are the two common features by which you can differentiate sleep myoclonus from myoclonic seizures. First thing is they occur only during sleep. Whenever you awake the baby, they will get aborted. And second thing is sleep myoclonus never involves face. So coming to the next category of seizures, that is EEG only seizures, which are the most common type of seizures in neonates. 50% of the seizures will have only EEG abnormality. They will not manifest clinically. So to classify a seizure as EEG seizure, that is only EEG seizure, it should have a particular duration, that is duration of at least 10 seconds and amplitude of at least 2 microvolts. These are the two basic criteria which it should fulfill. Second thing is it should be a sudden EEG change. It should be repetitive and should evolve in the morphology, frequency and location. So remember, to classify a seizure as seizure on EEG, it should have duration of 10 seconds, voltage of 2 microvolts, it should be a sudden EEG change and it should evolve over a period of time. And to classify seizures as two different episodes, they should be separated by at least 10 seconds. If they are separated by less than 10 seconds, then it is a single seizure. If the difference between two is more than 10 seconds, then these are two episodes. So as I have already told, 80 to 90% seizures, according to some study it is 50 and some say it is 80, do not have a clinical correlate. That is, EEG is must to diagnose neonatal seizure. Otherwise, you will miss majority of those seizures. Coming to the other thing which is commonly asked in exams, which is commonly each one of us should know, that what is the difference between jitteriness, which is sometimes usually seen in normal newborn, and how to differentiate from seizures. First of all is the ocular movements. Abnormal gaze fixation is always associated with seizure. It is not seen in jitteriness. Second thing is jitteriness can be evoked whenever you clap loudly in front of a baby. He will jitter, but seizures are not stimulus sensitive. They will not be elicited by stimulus. The jitteriness is actually a tremor-like movement. That is, it has an equal component. There is no slow and fast component as we see in tonic-clonic seizures. And whenever you restrain a baby with jitteriness, you will be able to stop jitteriness. But as if a baby is having seizure activity, you will not be able to stop with passive restraint. And the last thing is autonomic changes. Seizures may or may not be associated with autonomic changes, whereas autonomic changes are not a feature of jitteriness. So these are the 5 common things by which you can differentiate jitteriness from seizure. Jitteriness can be normal in first 24 hours of life. Pathological conditions which can lead to jitteriness include HI, hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia or drug withdrawal. These are the 4 common conditions which can lead to jitteriness, but it can be normal in first 24 hours of life. The other seizure mimics in neonates includes apnea, as already discussed, jitteriness, we have discussed benign neonatal sleep myoclonus and GER. Sleep myoclonus, as we have already discussed, occurs only during non-REM. As the baby is awake, it stops. It is induced by rocking the baby during sleep and it resolves by 2 to 3 months. Other common conditions, GR, is also called sometimes as Sandifier syndrome. There will be typical arching. Baby will be always cranky, crying. He will show discomfort. It will mimic like a dystonia and it will be like an opisthotonus as is seen in the diagram. To help in establishment of diagnosis, usually these babies respond to a 4-week trial of PPI, and mother will typically they will be spitting out the milk commonly, and usually according to the latest guidelines of SFIGAN, 24-hour pH monitoring and manometry should not be used to diagnose GR. You should just give a therapeutic trial. If they respond well, it is usually a clinical diagnosis. Whatever we used to read that each baby, if you are thinking of GR, you should do a manometry and 24-hour pH monitoring, that is no longer recommended by even by the North American Society or by the SFIGAN. It is a clinical diagnosis, especially in infants. You should always ask about the feeding history, whether the baby is formula fed. It's more common in formula fed babies. Baby will always be spitting milk. There may be abnormality. If it is severe, there may be abnormalities of weight, that is poor weight gain, and response to treatment. And there will always be abnormal posturing. Coming to the diagnosis part, first of all, history. Any patient, any diagnosis is always, it starts with the history. Always ask about history of suggestive intrauterine infections like fever or retroauricular lymphadenopathy, rash in the mother, especially in the first 3 trimesters of the mother. History of any diabetes in the mother. History of any drug abuse. Then during labor, you can ask for any incidence of fetal distress, whether instrumentation was used or not because of the possibility of IVH, need for any resuscitation that will give a clue to perinatal asphyxia, cord pH, then antenatal scans to know about any abnormality, any malformation, then frequency, what type of milk we are giving, what type of dilution we are using, whether there is history of vomiting or not. That can have either, if it is inadequate feeding, it can lead to hypoglycemia, or if it is formula feeding, it can lead to hypocalcemia. Then family history, there is a developmental disorder in the family, then you can think of genetic and other IM causes as a possibility. Coming to the examination, you should always do a head-to-toe examination followed by a complete neurological examination, and then a focus. If you find anything abnormal, go to that system and do that systemic examination. It is always difficult to distinguish between a seizure and a non-seizure activity. According to the study, around 1200 videos were taken, and these videos were, and the neonatologist and the intensivists were asked to differentiate seizure from the non-seizure activity. And believe me that 50% of these intensivists and neonatologists, they were not able to identify, they were not able to differentiate seizure from non-seizure activity. So it is easier said than done. It is very difficult to identify each and every case of neonatal seizures. Sometimes we overdiagnose and sometimes we underdiagnose. So EEG is an important modality which can help in establishing the diagnosis of neonatal seizures. So again, I am emphasizing the importance of EEG in a neonatal ICU. Coming to the baseline investigations, the first line investigation always rule out the possible metabolic causes which are easy to diagnose and easy to treat and have good prognosis. Like always do a sugar first with the help of glucose trick. Always rule out calcium, magnesium, and whenever you are thinking of sepsis, always start anti-meningitis treatment even if you are not able to do CSF. So these are the common three things which you should be done in each and every baby: glucose, calcium, and CSF examinations. And these are the common treatable conditions: hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, and meningitis. Always, once the baby is stable, or if your AF is bulging preterm, always do a neurosonogram which will help in establishing diagnosis of ultrasound. In a study, babies with neonatal seizures who underwent ultrasound, 10 to 40% of these babies had a diagnosis on ultrasound itself. So no need to do MRI in each and every baby. Then EEG, as again I have told you, EEG is not only important for establishment of the diagnosis, sometimes the response to treatment, that is, whenever you give anticonvulsants, there will be electroclinical dissociation. That is, whenever you start anticonvulsants, clinically baby will have seizures will be subsiding, but whenever you do EEG, there will be continuing seizure activity. This is called electroclinical dissociation. That is, clinically you have resolved the seizures, but EEG is having continuous seizure activity. So unless and until you do EEG, you will not be able to see this electroclinical dissociation. This electroclinical dissociation is because of the caudorostral development of, remember, KCC2. I told you that KCC2 develops after some time. So KCC2 channels, they develop caudorostrally. That is, first they develop in the spinal cord neurons, then brainstem, and then the cortex. So this KCC2 first develops in the brainstem and the spinal cord, so which are responsible for the clinical features of the seizures. So once they start developing in the brainstem, you will be able to abort the clinical features. But it takes some time for the cortex to develop these KCC2 channels. So there will always be cortical activity, but you will be able to suppress clinical activity. This is called electroclinical dissociation. This will only be picked up if you do EEG. Third thing is importance of EEG is to prognosticate. If there is poor background activity, you know that is persisting beyond 48 to 72 hours, you know that this baby is not going to do well. If there is resolution of the abnormal EEG within 24 to 48 hours, you know that this baby is going to do well. Again, response to treatment, as we have already discussed, and sometimes, though less commonly, the EEG is typical of some condition. For example, pyridoxine deficiency, they have typical spike and wave pattern. So sometimes EEG can be diagnostic of the condition itself. So that's why EEG is always important. Then, if the baby is dehydrated, there is poor feeding, always rule out electrolyte abnormalities like sodium, potassium, and other investigation, MRS, which can be done in higher centers but is not required in each and every seizure. So aim is to identify and treat seizure, especially the conditions which are easily to detect and easy to treat. Again, remember glucose, calcium, and meningitis. These should never be missed, and they can be done even at the remotest of the center. Second line investigations include the torch. If you are having a baby who is having seizure with microcephaly, is having cataract, is having jaundice, petechiae, purpura, hepatosplenomegaly, there is history of rash, jaundice, lymphadenopathy in the mother, you should always do a torch screen. In CSF is not only for meningitis, CSF can also help in establishment of certain other diagnoses, for example metabolic. If CSF glucose is very low and blood sugar is normal, it can, and the seizures are refractory to the treatment, it can be because of the abnormality of the glucose transport. That is, and usually these babies respond to ketogenic diet. Second thing is, you can do a CSF glycine. That is, if the baby presents with seizures within the first 24 hours of life, is having hiccups, is having persistent acidosis, always rule out NKH, that is non-ketotic hyperglycemia, in which case the CSF glycine will be very high. Third thing is CSF lactate. Whenever you do a CSF lactate and it is high and there is multi-organ dysfunction, always rule out mitochondrial disorders. So apart from meningitis, CSF can be used in various IEMs, for example glucose transport abnormality, NKH, that is non-ketotic hyperglycemia, and third thing is mitochondrial disorders. It can also be used to detect the pyridoxine deficiency, in which you measure pyrocholic acid in the CSF. So CSF is, whenever you do CSF, always think of other things which can be, and especially if in a baby who is not responding to conventional treatment and is having refractory seizures. And if there is persistent acidosis, hyperammonemia, and baby has deteriorated on day 5, day 6 after full feeds, always rule out IEM. And there will be abnormal odor, family history, consanguinity. Always do an IEM screen. So when to say or when to think of IEM as a cause of seizures? It should be ruled out in cases where the seizures begin in the antepartum period. That is, you ask mother whether there was increased fetal movements. If mother gives increase of history of increased fetal movement, it can be a sign of intrapartum starting of seizures. Second thing is, if baby is refractory to conventional treatment, baby is not responding to 2 to 3 anticonvulsants, always rule out IEM as a cause. If there is prognostic worsening, that both clinically and or with EEG, there is persistent worsening despite giving treatment, rule out IEM. Or if the EEG shows burst suppression, persistent burst suppression activity, always rule out IEM. In MRI, there will be prominent brain atrophy, or there will be finding of HIE, that is, mother is or the attendants are giving that the baby cried immediately after birth, but MRI shows features of HIE. Should always rule out IEM, because there are certain IEMs which can mimic HIE. So always in a baby of HIE who does not have a typical history suggestive of HIE, you should always rule out IEM. Like sulfite oxidase, multiple carboxylase, you should always rule out other IEM disorders in these babies. As we have already discussed, the EEG is the cornerstone for treating of neonatal seizures. Majority are EEG only. Electroclinical dissociation you have to be aware of, and you should know, as we have already discussed, that 50% of these clinicians, they were not able to detect that it is a non-seizure activity. So in order to avoid unnecessary exposure to these medications which are not 100% safe, remember that anticonvulsants itself has got many side effects which can be detrimental to the developing brain. So it should not be given as a cover to all the drugs in whom you are suspecting seizures. So should always be firm of your diagnosis, then only start anti-seizure medication, and they are important for diagnosis and prognostication. Remember, at least 1 hour of EEG recording is important. In neonatal, ideally it should be 24-hour EEG, but at least 1 hour should be done, and it should be continued till baby is at least 24 hours seizure free. So the convention, there are two types of EEG. One is the conventional EEG and another is the amplitude integrated EEG. The conventional EEG is the gold standard. Accuracy is around 50%. But it needs specified equipment, so the cost is an issue which may not be possible for each and every center. It is difficult to interpretation, that is, it needs a trained person for interpretation. It is good for seizures which have got low amplitude and which are very brief. So it is sensitive for those seizures. The only thing is that it needs a specific equipment, and so cost is an issue, and you need to be trained in reading in conventional EEG. Whereas the newer modality, that is amplitude integrated EEG, it can be a part of multi-channel parameter. For example, Philips will provide you an amplitude integrated EEG in multi-parameter monitor itself. It actually filters and rectifies the signal so that it compresses the whole book which you see in conventional EEG. Comes in a single page in conventional EEG. So it filters, rectifies and compresses the same image, but it has got a lower sensitivity and specificity compared to conventional EEG, and it is easy to interpret. That is, any common person can interpretation. It does not require that much of expertise. Sensitivity is low as compared to alone. It is 39% sensitivity and specificity is around 95%, which is lower compared to the conventional EEG. But something is better than nothing, and it is easy to interpret. Whereas conventional EEG needs expertise to interpret. The prognosis of seizures depends on multiple things. The first is the cause. What is the cause? SAH and hypocalcemia have the best prognosis. Then second thing is the EEG. If there is abnormal background activity, there is repeated seizures which are going beyond 7 days, they have got a bad outcome. Preterm baby, because of the associated morbidities like IVH, low bind, hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, they have got bad prognosis as compared to term babies. And last but not the least, abnormal neurological examination. It is a very important and fundamental thing which should be done in each and every baby with seizure. Any baby who has got a normal examination, there are 90% chances that this baby is going to do fine the rest of the life. But if it is abnormal, there is 80% chances that this baby is going to have some residue in the later life. So never forget to mention first and then to mention the findings of the neurological examination. Over the years, we have been able to bring down the mortality because of the neonatal seizures from 40 to 15%, but morbidity still remains the same, that is around 20 to 30%. So as I have already discussed, late hypocalcemia and SAH have the best prognosis, that is around 100%. Meningitis, hypoglycemia and early onset hypocalcemia, 50% of chances of impaired neurodevelopment outcome. And if there is abnormal development defect like schizencephaly, heterotropia, they have got poor prognosis. There will always be some neurological deficit. And IVH, again, if it is grade 4 IVH, again poor prognosis. Only 10% chances of that baby will be having normal outcome. Based on EEG, if it is normal, 90% chances that baby will do well in the rest of the life. Whereas if it is severe abnormal, like background suppression is there, then only 10% chances that baby will do well in the later life. So the goals of treatment are to abolish seizures not only clinically but also electrographically. You should be able to abort the seizures. You should be able to prevent the secondary injury which can be occurred because of the seizures. Always prevent hypocalcemia, glucose abnormalities, abnormal in the oxygenation ventilation, and always maintain the blood pressures. Prevent aspiration, which can happen in a baby who is having continuous seizure activity. Take care of the bladder and bowel. Provide a developmental supportive care to the baby who is already having an impairment of brain function, and always do a hearing and vision assessment in these babies in the follow-up. So whenever there is seizure, always ensure temperature, airway, breathing, circulation, as is done in any emergency. So same thing has to be ensured here. Always ensure proper temperature, always maintain airways, put a line, at least 2 lines if possible, and always check blood sugar with the help of glucometer. If you are not able to do, at least give 2 ml of 10% dextrose followed by calcium. If it is not responding to calcium or calcium hypocalcemia is persisting, always rule out hypomagnesemia. Hypomagnesemia is one of the commonest cause of persistent hypocalcemia. So once you have given glucose followed by calcium, then you should think of anticonvulsants. First and foremost is the phenobarbital. The phenobarbital still remains the drug of choice. Recently, a study was presented at the Pediatric Academic Society in US, where they did a RCT comparing phenobarbital with the levetiracetam. Although we had great enthusiasm in levetiracetam that it should replace phenobarbital as first line, but it was almost, the efficacy was half compared to phenobarbital. So phenobarbital, because the experience is vast, it has been used since decades, phenobarbital still remains the drug of choice. If remember that phenobarbital will abolish only 50% of the seizures. So in 50% of the babies, you will be required to give an additional drug, which can be either a phenytoin or midazolam or levetiracetam. Second line can be any one of these three. The studies do not show any change in mortality or long-term outcome. All three are equally efficacious, but all three have certain peculiarities. For example, the problems with phenytoin are it is cardiotoxic. So any baby who is having seizures with abnormal cardiac function, for example, babies associated arrhythmia is there, structural heart disease is there, or any other cardiotoxic medication is going, so don't give phenytoin. Other thing is, if there is the good nursing care is not present, phenytoin can cause extravasation and severe burn injury. So remember that phenytoin should not be used in a baby who is having cardiac disease, having arrhythmia, already on some other cardiotoxic drug like lidocaine. He should not be given phenytoin. The problem with midazolam is that it will cause respiratory depression. If the baby does not have a good respiratory drive, you should not give midazolam. Sometimes midazolam itself can lead to myoclonic seizures. So if you see a baby is on midazolam drip, you will find myoclonic seizures. So accordingly, you should choose your second line drug, and the newer one, which is devoid of all these side effects, is levetiracetam. So if the baby is not responding to phenobarbital, not responding to phenytoin, not responding to levetiracetam, that is at least on 2 to 3 anticonvulsants or maximum doses, think of other less common causes. For example, pyridoxine. Pyridoxine seizures usually present within the first 24 hours of life, but the onset can be in antenatal period also, or it can present in after neonatal period also. Remember, these babies are refractory to the conventional management and they will be hyper alert. So always give a trial of pyridoxine. The dose is around 50 to 100 mg per kg IV. Sometimes the EEG will show characteristic spike and wave pattern. So if you do an babies on EEG, you would give a pyridoxine, you will see the seizures will abolish. That is the diagnostic test for pyridoxine deficiency. Other metabolic conditions which you should rule out once the baby is refractory to common anticonvulsants is the biotin deficiency, in which you can give 5 to 10 milligrams either oral or IV. Then folinic acid deficiency, again dose is 5 mg BD. So always a baby is having refractory seizures, not responding to 2 to 3 anticonvulsants, always give a trial of pyridoxine, pyridoxal phosphate, biotin and folinate. If it is still not responding to these things, then you should intubate the baby, and you can give them thiopentone, you can give lidocaine, you can give. So as of now, phenobarbital still remains the drug of choice. Phenytoin is equally efficacious, but it is cardiotoxic and it can cause severe extravasation. Other thing is the therapeutic range for phenytoin is narrow as compared to phenobarbital, and whenever babies on multiple anticonvulsants, you give phenobarb, the oral absorption of phenobarb is very good compared to the phenytoin. The phenytoin has got an abnormal oral absorption. So always phenytoin should be tapered first, stopped first before phenobarbital, because the oral absorption of phenytoin is erratic, whereas phenobarbital has got a very good oral absorption. As already demonstrated by a single RCT which was done between phenytoin and phenobarbital done by Painter et al. They showed that phenytoin and phenobarbital are equally efficacious, and 50% will respond to a single anticonvulsant, and 80% if you combine these two together, 70 to 80% will respond. Levetiracetam is an upcoming drug, more trials needs to be done. It is relatively safe compared to the phenytoin and phenobarbital. Topiramate is again a neuroprotective. Again, it can be done, but the problem with topiramate is there is no IV preparation. It is only oral. So once if the baby is stable and is not responding to conventional treatment, you can try topiramate. But in a sick baby, topiramate cannot be given because there is no IV preparation as of now. Again, because of the abnormalities of the GABA, as I told you that GABA is excitatory in neonates because of the predominance of NKCC1. GABA agonists, that is phenobarbital and benzoate, that is midazolam, they will have inconsistent efficacy because these drugs act through GABA only. So these drugs may or may not, so the neonates may or may not respond because GABA here is excitatory, it is not inhibitory. That's why these drugs, that is phenobarbital and benzoate, that is midazolam, diazepam, lorazepam, they show inconsistent efficacy in neonates. So commonly used drugs are levetiracetam, loading dose is around 40 to 50 and maintenance can be anywhere from 30 to 100. You start with the lowest dose and then you should increase gradually. You can go up to 100. It only causes mild sedation and irritability. It is not cardiotoxic. It is not neurotoxic. So it is a relatively safe drug. Can always be tried after phenobarbital. Lidocaine is loading dose is 2 mg and maintenance dose is 6 mg. Again, it is cardiotoxic drug. So should not be used with phenytoin and should not be used in a baby who is already having an underlying cardiac condition. Lorazepam is a long-acting drug. It can be used to abolish, a stat dose can be used to abolish seizures, and it can cause respiratory depression, hypotension. So a baby who is already on shock, is having respiratory depression, it should not be used. Phenobarbital is still the drug of choice. It can cause skin rash, blood dyscrasias. Phenytoin, as already discussed, it can cause cardiotoxic and local reactions. Remember, in a baby who is having HIE, usually we start phenobarbital as a 20 mg loading followed by 10 mg, then again 10 mg. That is total of 40 mg. But in a baby who is having asphyxia, because of the abnormalities of the liver function, you should not repeat a loading dose of phenobarbital. You should just give a 20 mg per kg, and if baby is not responding, switch on to the second drug. Don't give more than 20 mg per kg loading dose, because that can cause phenobarbital coma in that patient, because they will have abnormal concentration of that drug because of the impaired metabolism. Phenobarbital is predominantly metabolized by the liver. So don't give more than 20 mg per kg loading dose in a patient with asphyxia. Move on to the second drug. And other clinical tip which I would like to mention here is, if the baby is not responding to multiple anticonvulsants, always try to do drug levels. If you find that drug levels are not in therapeutic range, stop those drugs and continue with the drug whose therapeutic range is there. So that will help you to tailor your anticonvulsant therapy. Always do drug levels in case baby is not responding to multiple anticonvulsants, if it is available at your center. Coming to the lidocaine, it can be used as second line or third line. Efficacy is around 70 to 90%. Again, concerns as already discussed. Cardiotoxic, dose we have already discussed. Again, there was a excitement with this bumetanide. Bumetanide actually acts directly on the NKCC channel. It directly blocks the NKCC. So the basic abnormality is corrected by bumetanide. A single trial which tried with bumetanide, they found that it causes severe ototoxicity. So the trial was stopped. Despite direct activity of bumetanide on NKCC1, this drug did not find much use in the clinical usage because of its toxicity. So maybe we can, or there are already ongoing trials with the lower dose. The results are as of now not available, but as of now it is more toxic rather than beneficial. So bumetanide, although it is a directly NKCC1 inhibitor, it should not be used because of the high risk of ototoxicity. Cochrane is only showing till 2004. After 2004 it was not updated and only shows 2 trials. Again, it does not answer which drug is better than the other. Phenobarbital still remains the drug of choice. So remember that every abnormal activity may not be seizure. So always remember that this anticonvulsant medications, they have itself side effects. For example, they can inhibit brain growth. They are neuronal toxic. That is, in animal studies, phenobarbital has been shown to have neuronal toxicity, causing neuronal apoptosis. They can have adverse behavior and cognitive effects in the developing brain. And they can cause, if there is intravenous exposure to these anticonvulsants, they can cause microcephaly, bird defects, for example, with valproate, phenytoin. And when to stop, that is the most commonly asked question. If there is normal neurological examination, there is 50% chances that baby will be doing good. So always, before stopping anticonvulsants, always think of doing a neurological examination. If neurological examination is there and baby is seizure free for 72 hours, you can stop the drugs. If the baby is on multiple anticonvulsants, you should always taper one by one. But if the baby is on single anticonvulsants, you don't need to taper, you can stop abruptly. Single anticonvulsants, you can taper abruptly once the baby is seizure free for 72 hours and neurological examination or EEG is normal. But if the baby is on multiple anticonvulsants, taper one by one. Don't stop all together, and phenobarbital should be the last to stop. So if there is abnormal EEG or abnormal neurological examination, you should continue anticonvulsant for 3 months. call the baby at 3 months, again do an examination. If it is normal, then stop. If it is abnormal, do an EEG. If EEG is normal, you can stop anticonvulsants. So take home messages after today's discussion is that seizure is itself an indication of underlying brain injury. If you are not treating it properly, it can itself lead to secondary brain injury. It is always treated as a neurological emergency. It needs prompt diagnosis and management to ensure best outcome for the baby, both immediate as well as long term. Ensure a uniform protocol. If you are follow a protocol, although no drug is superior to other, but form a protocol. It has been shown that the units which follow a protocol, they are going to have babies with better neurodevelopment outcome compared to units who are not following any particular protocol. That is, one is using one drug, other is using other drug. You should have a fixed protocol for your own unit, which may be different from, does not need to be similar to the other unit, but definitely have a fixed protocol for management of seizures in your unit. Remember, EEG is the best modality to diagnose seizures, and it is not a nice to thing, it is a must thing for managing neonatal seizures. And anticonvulsant should not be given as a paracetamol. That is, every fever should, every abnormal activity may not be seizures. So anticonvulsant should be used wisely and judiciously, because they are itself associated with abnormal effects. These are the references, and thank you. Any questions?